Species within the Tri-County region. Shikha holds a master's and doctorate degree in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife from Michigan State University. She has been working on environmental issues within the Great Lakes region for the past 16 years, focusing on water quality, environmental policy, and invasive species. She originally hails from Canada, is an avid sports enthusiast, cook, and a sustainability nerd. Today, Dr. Singh will be discussing what invasive species are and identify some species currently on our radar. With that, Dr. Singh, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, so let's see if we can get our sharing. So I guess I will stop other people. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And let me see if I have to. Okay, let me stop this for a second. Do I need to get this in full view, side view first? Okay.
You can just put it back to what you were doing, then press start from the beginning on your slide. That's what I did.
Okay. And then, there we go. All right, so are we good here? You should probably see a big Death Star. All right, so I promise you, I am a Star Wars nerd, but I do like to use Star Wars for a to drive home a point, which will be apparent later on in the presentation. So thank you for having me. And I always find it ironic that I'm the invasive species coordinator for Jackson, Lenawee, and Washtenaw when I'm Canadian, and probably some would consider me to be invasive in some way, shape, or form. So again, thank you, and I'm really excited to be here. As you know, as we all appreciate Michigan, and one of the questions I like to ask people is, how would you describe Michigan to someone who lives in another country, or even to someone who lives in another state? And normally if this was a live presentation, and people would be throwing their hands up and they'd be shouting out things like natural resources, beautiful trees, animals, it's beautiful. And you would probably, picture something like this, a beautiful park, state parks, we have the Great Lakes, and we have a lot of beautiful species. We have, a variety of turtles, birds, deer. We have a lot of deer, and, crayfish. So in addition to some of these common species, we also have a variety of unique species. And the first species I would like to draw your attention to is the Mitchell satyr, which is the top left corner. And this is an endangered species that we have here. And endangered species are basically any kind of animal or plant that are in danger of becoming extinct. And this particular butterfly is restricted to a rare wetland called fen, a type of a fen. And these are low nutrient systems that receive carbonate-rich groundwater. And if this habitat is destroyed or ruined, then this poor butterfly, is a little bit out of luck, because it's very, it needs this habitat. After that is the Heinz emerald dragonfly, which is also listed as an endangered species. And it's found in states like Illinois, Michigan, Missouri. And these adults lay their eggs in small streams and fens. So they also utilize a specific part of the environment. And, after hatching, these larvae do spend up to 5 years in wetlands before completely maturing and then emerging as dragonflies. Some of you may be familiar if you're an outdoor enthusiast along the Great Lakes shores, but the pitcher's thistle is something that is being threatened by habitat loss. It's a plant that is found near the sand dunes, and a variety of people would come and take pictures of it. It's a very important species to that sand ecosystem. The piping plover is an endangered shorebird. You have the Massasauga rattlesnake, which their numbers are getting better in Michigan, but generally they are threatened, and they are listed as a threatened species federally, and they tend to reside in wet prairies. Sometimes you can find them near riverbanks. And then we have a positive story of the Kirtland warbler. And this bird was on the brink of extinction, I would say, many years ago. And this bird species, lives in jack pine forests. It likes this habitat, and I believe it's, mainly the younger jack pine habitat. I'm not an expert on this bird, but, through predation, habitat loss, ecosystem changes, this bird was threatened, and thankfully they are getting better, and it has been shown to be a conservation success for Michigan. So we should be really proud. So Michigan has a variety of unique species. And, we can say that we have great biodiversity in this state. And so the topic of today's lecture or talk is about invasive species. And on a global basis, the two greatest destroyers of biodiversity are habitat destruction and invasion by exotic species. So in other words, invasive species. And this is a comment from an astound biologist from Harvard, Dr. Wilson. And so to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what invasive species are, I will draw your attention to the state of Michigan's definition, which is, widely used. And it's an invasive species is one that is not native, so it's not from around here, and whose introduction causes some type of harm or is likely to cause harm to Michigan's economy, environment, or harm to human health. And so when you bring in a non-native species, so an invasive, it won't necessarily be limited by the same constraints as a native species. You have certain species like, carp, they can be generalists, they can take advantage of a wide variety of water conditions. So they will thrive, if a habitat gets a little bit degraded or it changes, whereas your native species may not. So they will tend to be able to survive and flourish, whereas some of our native species may not. Or they may actually be bigger, stronger, and will outcompete these native species. So how do these invasive species actually get here? And there's a couple different ways. Intentionally, people will bring them in, they'll plant them in their gardens. They find them attractive, they find them beautiful. And so people used to just, get excited and put them in their suitcases, bring some seeds over and then plant them. And then lo and behold, sometime later, they would, get out of control. Or people would dump their aquariums unintentionally. You can probably envision this happening if you like to go out, recreating, like kayaking. You have weeds and seeds stuck on your boats and kayaks. So some of these invasive species can hitch a ride from one spot to another, even if on your trucks, just like little baby Yoda over here, like you can have insects, seeds, birds, you name it, hitch a ride, lay their eggs on something, and then as you travel home, it'll get dropped off in another area. And if you've ever watched Star Wars, you may have wondered, I wonder why he didn't clean off his X-Wing when he flew from the Dagobah system to Bespin. This is a large-scale issue of transporting various kinds of insects and weeds, or who knows what's on his plane. Well, I thought of that when I was watching that movie. So invasive species, there are several concerns, and we'll talk a little bit more about them when I talk about some species in particular, but generally they cause environmental harm. They tend to take over, suppress certain species. They cause economic harm. It takes a lot of time and money to get rid of them. You'd spend a lot of, chemicals, buying equipment, gear, and then, having to do it over and over again. And your time is worth a lot of money. You don't want to sit there for 3 hours every week getting rid of weeds, right? So that's one way, and it actually can impact tourism. A lot of people come to areas to take pictures, check off, butterflies off their list once they've seen them. And if it's not here, then people will not want to come back and, spend their money at hotels and whatnot. And then finally, we can talk about health. So some of these species can be quite dangerous. They have various, chemicals like some sort of an acid that can actually harm you. We're not going to talk about giant hogweed today, but you can kind of see in the bottom right corner, some poor gentleman has really bad blisters because he was exposed to it. And so the objective of this talk is to really highlight and show some new species that may not be on your radar, but something that we should be concerned about. So a lot of people are familiar with things like purple loosestrife or garlic mustard and Phragmites. I mean, that's pretty much all over the side of your roads. And so we won't be talking, much about that. If you are, interested in learning more about how to manage and tips and techniques to identify those, I would be more than happy to talk to you either after this presentation, or you can just email me. So we're going to introduce some of these species. Some are already here and some have not yet been found. So we're really trying to get people looking for these species because in some instances, it might be just a matter of time before they do get here. So with that, I'm going to start with our first species, European frogbit. This is a aquatic floating plant. It's generally free floating. If it is found in shallow water, it has a potential to root. But for the most part, you can actually just scoop it up and dispose of it. And it's a type of plant that you would find in people's aquariums. These plants are about 1/2 inch to 2.5 inches wide. They have 3 white petals and a yellow center, and you can actually see these little turions and kind of where my pointer is. If they can drop off and eventually become another plant. So these things have been disposed of in people's rivers, area ponds and rivers. And this is actually, prohibited from being sold, this particular species. There is an Amazonian frogbit that is still sold in pet shops. But as of right now, those don't tend to survive the cold temperatures. So you can still buy the Amazonian frogbit, and they are a little bit different. But these ones, like I said, are green and kidney bean shaped. And I want to draw your attention to some of these pictures. So you can see how they range in size. So some of them are a little bit bigger, and they form such large mats. So 1 or 2 may not be a problem, but once it gets in and establishes itself, it can cover an entire area within a couple growing seasons. And they're also really small, so it's hard to actually find them, especially if you have only a couple plants being dropped off. And you can see this one is, not even the size of my thumbnail. So they are small, and sometimes you may not know that you're bringing it from one spot to another. And so these plants are in Michigan. There are a couple spots in Grand Rapids. We do have it in a couple of lakes in the Waterloo Rec area. We did find it in the Grand River. And these plants tend to prefer slow moving water. So it was a little bit surprising when we found it in the Grand River, but I think it was in a small, like a meandering, slow moving section. And thankfully we were able to get it. And as I alluded to, it can spread through things like boats and kayaks, people dumping their aquarium in. And we have found this species in really remote, hard to get areas. And there's a potential that maybe wildlife could be bringing it in. But another thing to think about is maybe some of the waterfowl hunting, the waterfowl hunters have a role to play in this, because quite often some of them will take a canoe or a boat and go out to these more remote areas, and then they'll get dropped off, and they'll do their hunting and they'll come back. And some of these plants can actually survive out of water for a couple of days, especially if it's dark and it's moist and it's not dried out. And so you really can be, if you're fishing or going out a couple days in a row, then it's very easy for it to get transferred in that sense, survive. And so what are some of the negative aspects of this plant? It, as you can see, it does grow a lot, and it can create dense mats, which means it can alter the flow of water. It could also impede how some boats will move and people can swim or not. It takes over and maybe will prevent some of the plants from growing. And because it's a floating plant, if once it establishes the entire area, it'll actually prevent that sunlight from going through the water column and reaching the bottom. So then you don't have some of those native plants at the bottom of these lakes and rivers getting that much needed sunlight. And once you do have a lot of these plants, it does reduce oxygen in a sense, because once these plants die in the winter, they'll all die and decompose, they'll break down, and then you'll have all this extra carbon in the water system, which can eventually lead to fish kills if it's bad enough. And this is actually that reduced oxygen can apply to many aquatic invasive species that dominate the area. Eventually they will die and break down. So that's something to consider. Another one that's receiving a lot of buzz because it is expensive to manage is oak wilt. And I know that you had a speaker come in and he did a really good job a couple years ago. I think I was actually at that meeting. So I won't go too much into it, but oak wilt, what it is it's like a fungus that gets spread via sap-feeding beetles. Those beetles will come and they'll have the spores on them and they'll go from one spot to another. It can also move through firewood. So that's why we really ask people to burn firewood where you get it. That'll eliminate, different bugs and, fungus and bacteria, whatever the case is, from moving from one area to another. And oak trees are really kind of cool because they communicate via their roots. And so their roots will kind of intertwine and, like get all tangled up. And then so it'll actually flow through the root system from one tree to another. For some reason, white oak trees will localize disease a little bit better. So they're not, as badly impacted as the red oaks. They may get sick, but they won't always die. But the red oaks, once you get it, it is hard to treat. And unfortunately, those will die. And the good thing is you can test it. And that way, if you do find that you have it, there are different management things that you could do to kind of get rid of it. So one of the things that I tell people when you're trying to plant your backyard, your trees, really diversify, get a variety of trees in there. So that way, if something happens or something comes in, your entire yard won't get ruined. And so April 15th to July 15th, we ask you not to prune your oak trees, basically to prevent it spreading from other trees. And one thing to consider is, just because you have a lot of leaves shedding in the winter, it may not be, in the summer, it may not be because of oak wilt. It could be because of herbicide burn. So before you jump to the conclusion that it's oak wilt, make sure that you know what's going on around your tree. Trees are also very sensitive. So if you have a lot of work being done, disturbances, they're also very finicky and sensitive to that. If you're also having, work done on your house, you're building something, you're cutting wood and you're moving it. I know one gentleman told me that he cut down a lot of trees in his yard, sent it away so that it could be processed for lumber, and then they got it back and he was going to use that wood to work on his house. And he thinks that somewhere in that transportation mechanism, it was exposed to oak wilt, and then he got oak wilt at his house. That's an idea. We're not sure exactly where oak wilt came from, but just be really careful when you are bringing in wood from other regions. Stiltgrass is a species that you may have heard a lot about. It is a really hot topic in Washtenaw County. It's a grass, and I'll spend a little bit of extra time on this one. It is native to East Asia, and it was initially discovered in 1919 in Tennessee. And it was thought to have been brought in because they used this grass as packing material. So if you used to order porcelain, they would shove all these different plants in there, use it for basket weaving. And so they think it really got out there. And I wanted to show you this map because you can kind of see how this plant species has actually spread. And so it's a little bit more green now. This is an outdated map, but it's definitely moving its way. And this is a great example of how one invasive species can start in one area and then gradually move and take over. So this one, has a very telltale sign, a little white reflective line down the center of the leaf. This plant is about 2 to 4 feet in height, and the flowers you'll probably see later on in the summer. It's shade and full sun tolerant, so it's very adaptive to the environment. The leaves are about 3 to 8 centimeters long, lance shaped, and it reproduces mainly by seed. So there's like, each plant has like 100 to 1,000 seeds on it. And those seeds, once it gets into the environment, can be viable for up to 5 years. So this picture, you can kind of see Japanese stiltgrass. You can see it's a little bit fatter on the middle, white reflective line, but regular grasses, don't have that reflective line. And it spreads quickly, creates monocultures, and suppresses and prevents the growth of other species. And unfortunately, with some of these species, it's not favorable to eat. And so that just puts extra pressure on the native plants in the area. Black swallow-wort, I'm not sure how prevalent it is in Washtenaw, but definitely keep an eye out for this. It's a small, a viney looking plant, an 1/8 inch size flower, just really cute. Little chubby stars. But unfortunately with these guys, they trick monarch butterflies into laying their eggs on it instead of the regular milkweed. And unfortunately, monarch caterpillars cannot eat these leaves and they'll die. And actually you can have other livestock and animals getting sick if they eat this plant as well. Red swamp crayfish is a very tasty problem we have. If you go to a buffet and you see crayfish on the menu, it's probably going to be this species. It's about 2 to 5 inches long, dark reddish body, and you can identify it with these bright red bumps on its claws and on the front part of its body. It has a elongated head, a triangular rostrum. You can kind of see over here. It prefers permanent freshwater habitat. And there's a couple different, color variations. I don't feel comfortable saying, look at the body, it's dark, because it does have different color variations. It can be really, really dark, almost black, to a very tan brown-like color. So just really look at the dots. And this is a female with a bunch of eggs on it. So you can kind of see if that gets out. There's a lot of baby crayfish around. We do have small pockets, especially in Novi and Oakland County. So we are doing a red swamp crayfish trapping program in Washtenaw County specifically, and we are going to be focusing on golf clubs because they have been found, and they do for some reason like some of those trap ponds. They like small ponds, retention, stormwater basins area. So we're hoping to see and increase the survey efforts in Washtenaw County because I don't think a lot has been done in this region yet. Typically they are spread from bait release. So people, you will use them for bait and they'll just dump them in when they're done. They are pretty mobile. So once they are in a region, they can run across land. Teachers have inadvertently been a big source of release for these guys. You used to be able to get them in your science classes. And at the end of the year, teachers would actually just have a little release ceremony. And so that was unfortunate, but we just didn't really know at that point. And you can kind of see in the bottom picture, all these holes. It kind of destabilizes the bank because they can dig, holes several feet deep. And when you have a lot of them, it kind of creates Swiss cheese of the riverbank. And so it destabilizes, you can kind of see the erosion there. It outcompetes some of the native crayfish. And some of these species will introduce disease that'll impact our native crayfish. So we definitely don't want these guys here. I won't say much about this one, but marbled crayfish just got put on the list. It has a couple different body color types. Some of it is like a really beautiful blue. It can also range into the tan color as well. It's not here, but the horrifying thing about this species is its ability to self-clone. It reproduces through parthenogenesis. So we're definitely worried about this one coming in. And mile a minute weed is something that we just found in a neighboring area. So not in our area. It's a vine. It has really triangular, equilibrium, triangular shaped leaves. And it has these really cool barbed, recurved barbs on the underside of the leaves and on the stems, which kind of allows it to propel itself as it grows. So it can actually push against other trees and plants as it moves up a tree or a vine. And so they do have blue fruits. And again, this has, about 3,500 seeds. So you can imagine once it gets established, all these seeds are going to be floating around. So it can become a problem really quickly. And it prefers disturbed areas, wetlands, stream banks, right-of-ways, and roads. One of the problems with this species is that it tends to cover a lot of plants, and it prevents photosynthesis from occurring, again, because that sunlight is unable to reach the plant underneath it. So it does reduce biodiversity. You can kind of see how it has taken over everything. This is like that mile a minute that has just grown above everything. And you can kind of see these little barbs that I talked about. And this is like a winter view of it, but you can kind of see how it sits like tinsel. It just kind of sits on top of these trees and plants. So if you have orchards or you're a Christmas tree farm, you should definitely be on the lookout for this because it will suppress growth of some of these plant species. If you are doing some restoration work, you definitely don't want all your work and effort to be all for naught. So definitely keep an eye out for this one. It's new, so we're not sure where it is yet, but we found a patch in Albion. And so we're going to definitely keep an eye out and see if it made its way in Jackson yet or Washtenaw. You may have heard about this plant. This is this pest. It's Asian longhorn beetle, and it's black with white dots. And we ask you to check your trees for these pencil sized holes through your trees to make sure that it's not here. They are short. They're not able to fly long distances, but they can hop around and fly a little bit. And they like the youth as they grow and hatch, they will secrete like frass, which is basically like a sawdust like excrement. So look for that on the bottom of your tree. And the reason why we are worried about them here is because they do impact hardwood trees, so such as maple, ash, elm, and they also can get moved from firewood and lumber. So they're not here in Michigan yet, but definitely one to keep an eye out for. And we do get calls every year, hey, I found it, but if you see a little spot right in the back of its head, that's probably the native one. So I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to speed up a little bit. We have the spotted lanternfly. We don't have this one here yet either, but if you ever see a plant that has, bright red wings and, a very brownish tan, gray forewings with black spots and a yellow abdomen with strap bands on it, please contact us because we are worried. You can kind of see my fingernail. It's not super big. It's about 1 inch long. And the juvenile are very different. In June and July, they're like black with white spots. But in July to September, they're pretty much like bright red. They almost look like ladybugs before they get to that adult size. And unfortunately, we found 2 dead specimens in Michigan in Wayne County area. They are found on building pallets. We found a dead one in Kent County. And so definitely if you have stuff being shipped in, check your pallets for, dead insects and bugs. They are definitely moving. It's a big spot in Pennsylvania. So if you're ever traveling in and around there, check your car, if you're getting packages from there, make sure it doesn't have any eggs on it. And these guys are of concern because they will impact, apples, grapes, maple trees, hops. And, with hops, we're like the 14th in the world production. So we do make a lot of, produce a lot of hops here. And so I talked about, why am I talking about Star Wars? Well, it highlights the issue of scale. So while we're not transporting from one galaxy to another, we being very, travel, we like to travel. We go from, one spot at our county to another county. We go from Michigan to Oregon, or we go, tourist. So the whole point is scale matters. So what, if you're not careful about, brushing off your shoes and making sure there's no plant matter, stuck to your waders or your fishing gear, you have the potential of transporting a species from your area to another. And so I really urge you to be vigilant. A lot of these, species are very small, so they can't really make it on their own. They need our help for them to become a problem somewhere else. And a case in point, New Zealand mud snail. I didn't talk about this in our presentation, but it's a snail that's native to New Zealand, and it was found in Idaho Snake River in 1987. And because you had a lot of people fishing, and they would fish, a lot in that river, and they would come back to Michigan or what other state that they're in, and they'd resume their fishing activity almost like the next day without decontaminating their waders or their gear. And that's one way for some of these species to get here. And as I had mentioned, some of these species can survive a couple of days out of water. And I really want you to reflect, like, have you visited an out-of-state national park? And if you have, did you brush and check your shoes, your hiking gear for seeds? When you park, your car in a camping spot, are there trees, like leaves and grass stuck between the wheels and your, I'm not a car person, but, like in the engine area, in the trunk area, like, are you transporting things from your camping site back home? And I really want to, the reason why we have all these border food restrictions is because we really are trying to prevent, various pets and pests and diseases from making its way into this area. And I know we talked about a lot of invasive species that are a problem here, but recognize that our native species are also problematic in other countries. And so, with an invasion curve, the earlier, you find something, the easier and cheaper it is to, get rid of it. But once you're at the back, the tail end, then it gets really expensive. It takes a lot of time, and you may not even be able to get rid of that invasive species. You're pretty much only trying to control and manage it, and unfortunately the public awareness typically begins, right around the middle. So that's why I really am excited to do these kind of presentations, is because I really want us as a community to get ahead of the problem, and look for these species before they have a problem, so that we do have a chance to, be proactive and hopefully stop it from becoming a big problem. So if you do see one of those species, you can contact me, and if you can send me pictures, that's great. You can go on to Missin, and I can provide links. Maybe I can steer you to our website, and there's all these links that you can actually log in and say that, hey, I found this species, so can you please do something about it? And so with vigilance and care, we can prevent full infestations. We have beautiful lakes and streams that we want to keep them beautiful, and we don't want them infested with all these other plants. So I think I ran over a little bit. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take a couple.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. We did have some questions come through the chat. We maybe have time for one or two. I was really curious if lightsabers are useful for managing garlic mustard.
Maybe not lightsabers, but we do use flame. We do use flame
Right on.
to
Yeah.
get rid of stiltgrass, and so that.
Nice. We did have a few questions about the crayfish. Someone was asking what the native crayfish species are, and also why is the blue spotted crayfish a concern in Michigan?
Well, one of the reasons is that, if we don't really know much about it, if it gets into Michigan, what it's going to do, how it's going to compete. And, we just don't know, kind of like coronavirus, we don't know what's going to happen. And so and the fact that this crayfish can come in and it doesn't need a partner, it doesn't need like another mate to reproduce with, it can start creating a healthy population on its own. So part of it is, the concern is like, what if it is more aggressive, than, or if it's really aggressive, it might outcompete the native species. It may actually have, again, diseases like the red swamp crayfish may have. So you bring up a good point. I don't know. We don't know much about this. Typically it's in Europe, and this was an aquarium species. And I did some research into this, and I want to say that it was kind of like an accidental occurrence. So we don't really know. It may have been a hybrid between two different crayfish. So this is a little bit out of my expertise. So I hope I'm not lying here, but I believe it was like maybe like a hybrid or something happened, and all of a sudden people noticed that these crayfish started, reproducing on its own. So it's not a normal thing for these crayfish to do this. So, what if it comes in here and does that with another species? We just don't know. I don't have a better answer for that one because it is quite new, unfortunately. And but the red swamp crayfish, like I said, that one is big, it's aggressive, and it can displace native crayfish.
Great. I think if we could squeeze one quick question in, and attendees, feel free to put any more questions in the chat, and we'll try to respond to you in the chat. There's also the links for the JLW CISMA in the chat, and the MISSN website is also in the chat. But the last quick question was, someone mentioned that wake boats can't completely purge the water reservoir, and there's a more risk for spreading aquatic invasives, including the frog bit. Is there other ways to ensure that the wake boats are not spreading that?
One of the things that I'd really urge people to do, and I'm not familiar with wakeboards, too much, but definitely clean, drain, dry. Anything that goes in, make sure you wash it, you wipe it down, and especially if it's going from, one body of water to another. So definitely, yeah, I guess, like storing it inside, if you have the space, you definitely want to dry these things out. But I don't have, other than that, I think that's the prevention is the key here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. I think that's all for the questions. We'll get moving here.
All right, and I apologize if I went extra long.
No problem. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Singh. That was very, very helpful. Thank you for being with us tonight and with your presentation. It was very informational.
Yeah.
And as everyone can see, you can get in contact with her contacts. You wrote them down. Okay, so we'll be moving on then with the meeting. We have cover a few business items. The first is approval of the 2020 annual meeting minutes. Director Shannon Brines, the district secretary, will handle this item. Is he on here?
Yes. Can you
Yes,
hear
he
me?
is. There he is. Yes, we hear you.
Video says it won't start for me, but I have audio.
Very good.
The minutes from the 2020 annual meeting are included in the presentation. Are there any corrections to the meeting minutes from last year? All right, hearing none, the minutes will stand as presented.
Thank you, Shannon. Next is the approval of the 2020 financial report. District Treasurer Howard Zias will cover this item.
Oh, can you do that again? Sorry.
We got it now?
Sorry, guys.
We hear you.
Now you
Can you
do.
hear me? Okay, we'll do it again. The fiscal year 2020 financial report is included in the presentation. Is there any discussion or questions on the report? Hearing none, the financial report will be filed as presented.
Thank you, Howard. Next, we have a brief program and agency reports from 2020 at this time. Megan, go ahead with your report.
All right. Hi again. So I'm just going to provide a little recap of what also was in the annual newsletter that you should have received in the mail by now, I hope. If you haven't received it in the mail and you'd like one, just get in touch and we're happy to send one along. 2020 ended up being a good year for us, despite all of the challenges that we and everyone else was facing. In 2020, we proceeded with our spring tree and shrub distributions. We were able to assist 335 residents and distributed 574 fruit trees and thousands of native plants into the community. And in the fall, we launched a second distribution and worked with 217 residents and a really awesome crew of 20 volunteers and distributed 7,300 trees and then another over 4,000 native plants. And I have to give a special plug to our very special partners at the Water Resources Commissioner's Office for just being amazing partners in this whole process. And we worked very closely together to figure out a safe way to engage staff and volunteers to get these plants out, because we definitely noticed this year with everyone being sequestered at home and on their properties, there was a real increase in demand and need for plants and trees because people wanted to be out working on their own properties, getting to projects maybe they hadn't gotten to in years. So we were able to help as many people as we possibly could this year. Let's see. Rain barrels, we also had a record year with 84 barrels. Over 100,000 gallons were diverted as a result of those rain barrels this year. And so really successful. Folks are just increasing their interest in rainwater collection. We hope to be able to increase our education and resources around that as well. Before everything shut down last year, we were able to sneak in a few exciting workshops in the first quarter. So we had a pollinator garden workshop with 37 people coming out to sit in a room together and engage over this topic. And it was really exciting, a lot of passion. Vern Stevens, who's actually going to be speaking again in a webinar format next month on February 17th, free webinar, just a quick plug there. And then we also hosted a seminar for farmers, and we had a panel of really great speakers and 48 attendees. I believe that was last February. And over the course of last year, between the virus interrupting our workflow and who was in the office and who wasn't in the office, and we also moved during that period to a new office space on Zebra Road with MSU Extension, Water Resources, and several other partners. We were able to assist almost 500 people with technical assistance, everything from woodlot management, invasive species identification, crop planning, not COP planning, native planting, and beginning farmer resources. And the biggest success, I would say, from 2020 is that we passed our first millage on August 4th. Residents of the county approved with 76% of the vote. So thank you all for those of you who supported the Conservation District. And for the next 5 years, that's really going to have a big impact on the work that we'll be able to do. So coming up in 2021, we're already into our second quarter of our fiscal year, but we've got lots of exciting things planned. Doug Reith and Eris Brandvain are new employees with us, and we have a school and community habitat grant that is just launched. We tried to launch it last year, but for obvious reasons it did not happen, but we already have applicants, schools and community groups getting in touch with us. We have a countywide resource assessment that will happen this year, and we really need your input. We'll be approaching our partners, residents, and other organizations to give us feedback on what resource concerns are most important to them. And then we'll have the second annual Native Plant Expo on June 5th at the Farm Council grounds, and a whole slew of conservation webinars and clips. So we'll have plenty of opportunity to increase our skill set in webinars and virtual farm tours. So we hope that you all can join us. All right. Oops. Let me add one more, actually. Can you guys still hear me? I've lost my... Hold on. Am I still sharing? Here we go. Hold on. Okay. I'm not sure if Solomon is on, but he'd asked me to present really quick as well. One of our closest partners is with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, the NRCS, here in Ann Arbor. We were office mates for many years, and our organizational histories grew up together, so to speak. So we still work very closely, and Eris Brandvain is a conservation technician who is working very closely at both offices, actually. But in 2020, NRCS had an amazing year as well. They completed 27 contracts in Washtenaw County, which covered 3,893 total acres for a total of almost $3 million in cost share payments from NRCS. And so a lot of those practices included farmland preservation, cover crops, conservation cover, brush management, seasonal high tunnels, and more. And I wanted to point out to the right there are planned conservation acres. So we had even an additional number of landowners seeking to do conservation practices in the future. So they work with technicians to plan out how they'll manage their woodlot, or where they're going to put their high tunnel, or pollinator habitat, what have you. So NRCS is also really rocking out in 2020. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Megan. Next, we'll have Nick Achinsky and give us a report on meat program.
All right, you guys can all hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, evening everyone. I'm Nick Mashinsky. I'm the meat technician for Washtenaw County. I've been here since 2017. And so what is MEAT? MEAT is the Michigan Agricultural Environmental Assurance Program, and you can read the mission statement there, but the gist of it is to implement a voluntary program for farmers of all sizes to participate in, and to help those farmers, to assist them in addressing any environmental concerns they may have on their property. And one thing it doesn't mention there is that it's completely confidential. I don't share anyone's information with anyone else, even under torture. Okay, maybe under torture, something might slip, but generally speaking, I don't share anything. Verifications for fiscal year. The program's been in the county since 2007. And every year it's gone up, except we had a down year 2015, a couple of great years, 2018, 2019. And this year, for obvious reasons, down year, we had about 13 total verifications, but we're still, above the average of just about 10 verifications. So overall, pretty good, below the 5-year average. But again, those past couple of years really drove that up. Getting into more detail, what you're seeing here is some of the stats and measures I use and I report. A lot of red, obviously, but we're comparing this year or this past fiscal year 2020 to 2019, which, as I said, was a record year in terms of verifications and many numbers. So it was probably going to be tough to match those numbers regardless. And then you throw a pandemic in there, and it's about nearly impossible. So it is what it is. We're hoping for a different outcome this year. A quick recap on what we could do this year. I was working part-time in the spring. My daycare closed. Hopefully you don't hear my son too much in the background there, but so I was on part-time and worked more with small farmers this year than larger farmers, solely because they're a bit more adaptable to the situation, less farm hands, less workers coming in, so COVID was less of a concern on their own property. Did manage to get a couple events in. We had a MIEP organic discussion February 3rd, a pesticide review class in January. I believe we managed to do a shop talk or a garden talk in mid-February as well. Couple things we had to cut out was a land management tour. We had a couple folks lined up where we could tour their properties and learn about some of the things they're implementing on their property to help the natural environment. And then our ag field day, typically that's in August, and we did something different this year. We actually pushed it back, and we had a virtual grazing field day at Baseline Farm, which we'll touch on in a little bit with John. But we partnered with MSU Extension. They were fantastic. They handled all this technical stuff, and we worked with John. We got some great video of his cattle and a couple of guys staying in the field talking about conservation. We hope to be in person in August of this year, and hopefully we'll see that come to fruition. I have a lot of re-verifications to do this year. MIEP is a 5-year program, so if you're verified, you'll see me in 5 more years. You might see me between those 5 years as well, but for re-verification, you'll see me in another 5 years, and we've got quite a few due. And of course, as always, get larger farms involved. That's always a goal. More specifically, these are the fiscal year 21 goal numbers, and compared to the past 2 years, with the virus still among the communities, we're kind of keeping it conservative. Won't be breaking any records this year, but I think it can still be a pretty successful year overall. And this is my contact information. You can email me, nick.mashinsky@washtenaw.cd.org. And if you want to know more about the program, you can go ahead and check out meep.org as well. And with that, Matt, I will turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Thank you all for a recap of 2020. Now for the highlight of the evening, the presentation of the 2020 Conservationist Awards. First off, we have every year the Board of Directors accepts nominations for 3 awards. First being the Walter Wolfgang Memorial Conservation Farmer of the Year, the Small or Beginning Conservation Farmer of the Year, and the Tree Conservationist of the Year. Each of these awardees has demonstrated exemplary conservation practices over the years. The 2020 Walter Wolfgang Memorial Conservation Farmer of the Year Award is presented to Randy Klager. Conservation Technician Erez Brandvain will present more on Randy's operation. Erez?
Okay, can all hear me? Good.
Yes.
Okay, I do not have kids in the background, but I do have dogs, so hopefully they'll behave. So as most of you know, I'm pretty new to the community here, so it's been fun learning about agriculture and the diversity in Washtenaw. And one of the first things Megan had me do was reach out to Randy, who I was told is very conservation minded, and I had a chance to interview him, and it was great. I learned a lot about the community. He showed me around his farm, and I quickly learned he's like a staple who represents the community in terms of agriculture and really embodies what conservation is. Didn't take long to realize that he's got a really strong passion for conservation, and when the way that he operates his farm, he kind of keeps that in mind. And you know, I spend half my time working in the NRCS office, and when his name comes up, it's you know, conservation is one of the first things that comes to people's mind, is something I've noticed. So so our next slide. So Randy, what I learned about his farm is that he's a second generation farmer. He's got a son, 23 years old, and they work together. They farm about 1,000 acres, row crops and wheat, so corn, soybeans, and wheat. Primarily takes place in the Saline area. It has about he's got his 1,000 acres, and he's stood out for his dedication to keeping the River Raisin watershed as free from runoff as possible. So that's something that he keeps in mind when he's making his agronomy decisions, talking about fertilizer and stuff like that. So and we can go to the next slide. He's also got a nice little beef operation. So everyone loves cows. That cow is really friendly to me. It's my buddy. So he's got the row crops, the wheat, and the beef. And you know, again, going back to the conservation, even with his cattle, you know, he's very intentional about how he spreads his manure, where he decides to do it, calculates all that. So so our next slide. So this is just I was able to see a few things that he does conservation wise. It's got grass waterway, which, you know, simple things like that really make a difference when you're talking about agriculture and conservation. I was able to talk to him a little bit about how he got involved with us, the conservation district, the NRCS, and just conservation as a whole. And he was about 10 years ago approached by someone from the staff at NRCS about participating in the conservation stewardship program. And, you know, that CSP program, which is something I cover, it really identifies farmers who have already done things initially that are conservation based. And we kind of, the way I think of it is it takes conservation to the next level. So Randy was an ideal candidate. He already practiced no-till cover crops, and he rotated his crops on a yearly basis. So he's an ideal candidate. Through the program, he was able to further his conservation efforts, and these are all things he does today and on a yearly basis. He implements pest management program. He installed these grass waterways around his farm to reduce erosion caused by water. Something he talked to me a lot about was kind of keeping things in the tune of nature. So, you know, by soil testing, he's seeing that maybe he doesn't necessarily need to add certain fertilizers because the nutrient levels are already good in the ground. And it's little things like that, you know, he talked about how he's not there to reinvent the wheel. He just wants to do things the right way. And it's little things like that that I think make conservation so great. You know, just paying attention to the details of what's going on your ground. So he keeps things simple, logical, and efficient, follows basic but critical steps to reaching goals. And, you know, none of this stuff at all compromises goals, economic and yield goals as a farmer. So he does a great job, and we can go to the next slide. Again, just as someone new to the community, I really enjoyed talking with him, learning about what he does. He's, from my perspective and from the things that people in the community have told me about for years, he's always been a conservation-minded farmer. And he really exemplifies how easily adaptable these conservation practices can be, and the value of getting involved with NRCS programs. So very educational, can really make a difference in how people operate their farms. So I know that on behalf of the Conservation District, we appreciated his dedication to conservation farming, and we all congratulate him. I don't think he made it onto the call today. I think he might have had something. But I was able to deliver his award to him, and he was pretty excited about it. So that is our Wolfgang Memorial winner for this year.
All right, thank you, Erez. And once again, the Walter Wolfgang Memorial is presented to landowners who have consistently used conservation measures on their farms, not because they are required to do so, but because they want to protect and conserve their land and water resources now and for future generations. Once again, congratulations, Randy. Thank you, Erez. Next, we have the 2020 Small and/or Beginning Conservation Farmer of the Year Award, which is presented to John Cox. And meat technician Nick Machinsky will present more about John's operation.
Yes, so I've known John for, oh man, probably about 3 years now. Prior to farming, John was actually an engineer. Soon, though, he became interested in working on the land. After working in Iowa, John came over here to Michigan and set up his operation at Baseline Farm in Webster Township, where he has one of the best barns in the county, I'd say. If you could go to that next slide, please. Look at it there. That's beautiful. John leases 258 acres of land and is able to graze about 150 head of cattle on 200 acres of it. We can actually go to the next slide, Megan. There you go. After starting out with a heritage breed from England called White Park, John has diversified his herd a little bit. And as you can see from that picture, they look to be quite happy. Next slide, please. Part of that reason why they're so happy is thanks to John's management of his pasture land. He rotates the herd at least once a day, sometimes two, depending on the conditions of the pasture, if it needs some more rest. It allows the herd access to fresh forage while also preserving its condition. It ensures that there's plenty of time for that pasture to come back better for the next round that the cattle move through. And it reduces erosion concerns, making sure that cattle have enough forage and when they're ready to come back to that spot. And as you can see from that second picture on the right there, it's also a great way to ensure that manure doesn't build up in any one location on the farm. It's pretty evenly spread, and his soil tests certainly tell that story. Next slide, please. So that's not me in the picture. I believe that's our chairperson, Shannon. But I met John in October of 2017 after coming up from Lenawee as a meat technician there. I remember sitting down with John and discussing his operation in the back of his yard behind his house. And in my experience in meat, it can be quite easy for certain farmers to become verified if they're doing things right already. And John certainly does a lot of things right by the environment. I think the only thing that slowed us down perhaps was maybe we had to close a well or two, and that was no fault of his own. That was just kind of the lay of the land there. A couple of abandoned wells we took care of, but everything is done by the books at Baseline Farm. Next slide. John hasn't stopped there though. He's now working on a better watering system that reaches further out into his pasture land, as well as improving some fencing on his property. This past October, Baseline Farm was featured on our virtual grazing field day that Washtenaw County Conservation District co-hosted with MSU Extension. The positive feedback and comments that the event received were numerous, and most complimented John about the great system that he manages. All around, the work of John is admirable, and his decision and his dedication to conservation-minded farming is also admirable. And it's very much appreciated by those of us who live and work in the county. So congratulations very much, John.
All right, once again, the 2020 Small and or Beginning Conservation Farmer of the Year Award is presented to recognized farmers cultivating less than 10 acres and or beginning farmers in their first 10 years of farming that have committed themselves to environmental stewardship. John has already received the award due to our virtual meeting. We'd like to have John speak a few words if you would, doesn't mind. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, sure. I didn't really prepare any marks, but I'd like to say thank you for the honor. You know, we're still getting started here, it feels like. So I think there's a lot of work left to do, but you know, so far so good. And yeah, we'll keep going at it.
All right, very good. Congratulations again. Okay, moving on then, we have the Tree Conservationist Award presented to Walter Kepler. The Tree Conservation of the Year Award is presented to recognize excellent forest management and tree planting efforts. Walter has already received the award, but we'll have a presentation which Erez will go ahead and present.
All right, so I'm back. So after I met with Randy, or maybe it was on a similar day, I was also able to kind of do this interview with someone named Walter Kepler. And again, I'm new to the community, so I'm learning about all these aspects of agriculture in Washtenaw. And meeting Walter was really, really great. Great guy, really, really nice. And you know that it's when you meet someone who's so passionate about what they do, it's pretty inspiring. Even if it's not something you're into, it just I know that I was able to get excited about what he was doing, and I'm really, really impressive. So excited to meet Walter. Nice guy as they come, passionate about what he does, passionate about planting trees. So here is a little information about him. We can go to the next slide. Some background about Walter and his trees is that he's got 13 acres in Dexter. It was originally a crop farm, but in 1994, Walter decided he was going to start planting trees in native plants. First year, he planted about 400 trees, and year by year, Walter took simple steps to plant more. Then in 26 years and thousands of trees later, his property is just flourishing with trees and wildlife, mature trees, young trees, native plants. So I guess it's just, every year he plants a few more, and now he's got something really, really great going on over there. So we can go to the next slide. So I know that everyone in this meeting, including me and the staff and the participants, I'm sure there's a reason that we care about conservation. It could be simple, it could be complicated, it could be anything really. But with Walter, he met someone when he was young, who he gives all the credit to, named William Stamp. He was a professor of resource planning and conservation in the U of M School of Natural Resources and Environment, and he gave a presentation to Walter. And this is a little story Walter told me. He gave me a nice article about it. And this professor spoke about the importance of conservation and tree planting. And that was a message that Walter took literally, and cherishes to this day. And that's really evident based on his property. So I was able to go there a few times, really great weather each time. Beautiful pictures, but those don't even do justice of what he's done. We can go to the next slide. So as you saw a few slides back, he's planting trees. And these are this is just a picture of some mature trees. So it really, what he does, just planting trees every year, really represents conservation. And he's definitely the ideal person to receive this award. Puts his heart into what he does, into planting trees and establishing native habitats on his property. And really that's what conservation is all about. So similar to Randy, he doesn't, his goal isn't to reinvent the wheel, just to keep the ecosystem and his property in tune with nature by planting these things. And his goal is definitely, I mean, it seems like he surpasses that every year. So I'm glad I got to meet him, and really happy that he gets this award. So one more slide. So yeah, just some more trees and really just a beautiful habitat. And I'm new here, but I'll be here for a while, and I'm excited to see where this property goes in the next several years. And I'm sure that we have lots of conservation work to always do together. So with that, very happy to have given this to Walter.
All right, thank you, Ares. We do have Walter on. If you'd like to say a few words now, go ahead.
Want to thank you again for this prestigious award, but you do it not for the award, but for the enjoyment out of planting trees and giving back to the environment. And I've already got my order in for this spring for 20 more trees to come. I've scaled down quite a bit since I first started planting, 25 years ago, but every year I plant some more. So again, thank you very much. And again, thanks for the award.
Congratulations, and keep up the good work. All right. Next, we have finally the Board of Directors and Staff would like to recognize Donald Rentschler with the Distinguished Service Award for his 25 years of service on the Board of Directors of the Conservation District. I'd like to have a few of the board members speak on his behalf or in comment of him? If Howard, if any words, give Don. I know you've been on the board longer than anyone with him, so.
Are we on?
Yep, they can hear. Can you guys see? Okay, there we go. So you gotta, well, you don't want to get close. One person at a time. Do you want to say some words, Howard?
Yes, I do. Don's been on this board longer than I have, and I've been on this board forever. And he's been instrumental in making sure that we stay grounded, don't spend money that we don't have. That was always his big thing. When he got on the board, they were almost broke, and he says, "Oh, we can't have that." And he made sure that we kept going all these years. And he always had a good story, usually about airplanes. So if anybody ever talks to Don, he'll tell you all about the flying farmers and all the trips they take. And he's just been a very good mentor for the rest of us on this board. And we're sure gonna miss him when he's not here anymore.
That is for sure. Don has always been a key person on our board and really been a great mentor for all of us. We're really going to miss him. Does anyone else have any comments?
I wanted to share this in the background when the next person speaks. Those are some shots from the late, well, I guess the early mid 90s to late 90s.
So I think Don's got a speech to give us tonight. Maybe he'll give us some words of wisdom.
Go ahead, Don.
All right, got you.
Am I gonna be on? Well, there I'm on.
Yeah, you're
All right, I'm there. I'd like to
You're
show
okay.
the audience the plaque that the Conservation District awarded me. I don't know if everybody can get a good look at it here, up a little higher. Very dear to my heart. And I would like to thank the board members for all of the 25 years of service with the Conservation District. I enjoyed being one of the board. I want to recognize Dennis Rice for the leadership of the district in the past few years. And I'd also like to thank my wife, Mary, and my family, Ryan and Natalie, and my 5 grandkids for helping us stay farming out in Lodi Township. And I want to thank everybody again for this award.
Yay. We have an audience in here.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Don. All right, lastly, I'm happy to report the election for our 2021 director election for 2 director positions to hold 4-year terms. Jill Donor and Hannah Bradshaw have been elected and to serve these positions. Congratulations. I'd like to thank everyone for attending the virtual 73rd District Annual Meeting. Hopefully the last virtual meeting we'll have. We look forward to working with all of you in 2021. And thank you again for coming tonight, being on, and the meeting is adjourned.